100. So we'll go ahead and get started. We have it's actually an honor to introduce Chief Chris Blume. I've spoken about his presentation we had in Kansas City, and he is gracious enough to give that to us on upstream thinking processes. And so I will introduce Chief Blume, but I want to remind everyone that we will have the link in chats. That use that link, put your name and email if you'd like to receive a certificate. IFE for CPD be 1 hour training credit, and our president Randy Haniff and a USA branch is going to be a little bit delayed coming on, so we'll probably let him speak a little bit at the end, and then we'll have Q&A. We'll monitor chat for any questions, and then plus feel free at the end when Chief Blume gets done to come on, unmute yourself and ask directly, because some great information I'm excited about today. I'll introduce without further ado Chief Chris Blume, Fire Chief of Meridian, Idaho. He has more than 2 decades of fire service experience. He's an author, lecturer, and independent consultant. Chief Blume is a graduate of the Executive Fire Officer Program and is an active instructor for NFA. In fact, I recently saw him on a graduate's picture where he was recently involved in teaching the graduating class. And as a student of fire service, he's focused on value-driven, mission-focused leadership for the profession. I think you'll all see that throughout his presentation. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce and turn the presentation over to Chief Blume.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief Botwell. I appreciate
Chief,
that.
thank you.
And I will start to share my screen. And I believe it's going to start with a disclaimer that we need to view here, I guess, momentarily. So I hope that pops up. Okay. All right. Well, again, I appreciate the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I guess, wherever in the country or on the other shore you might be for the presentation today. You'll see this term, the Upstreamist. Well, that's kind of a modification of the term upstream and the idea of upstream thinking. The purpose of our discussion today is to share that perspective that being an upstreamist offers the best and most efficient way for us to make good decisions for our fire service. This opinion or this position, it comes from basically 25 years of up-close experience with the American Fire Service, but I would be remiss if I didn't give the credit where it's due to several books that have sort of brought this to the forefront, and specifically Team of Rivals, Leadership Challenges and Lessons from the Octopus, Team of Teams, and most importantly and central to this is the book by Dan Heath, Upstream. So to begin, let's start with a story to kind of frame this narrative and understanding of what it is to be an upstreamist. And I really like this picture of a swiftwater rescue taking place because that's what we do. And if we could imagine that we're having a lunch, all of us are having a lunch together on the side of a river, and all of a sudden we notice a young child floating down the river. Well, one of us decides we're going to go save that child. So we run to the shore, jump in, we pull that child out and put him on the shore. And no sooner do we get them on the shore, but we look back into the water and we see another child floating down the river. So another one of us jumps in the water to save the child. And this continues. The problem is, if none of us decide to ask the question, how are these kids ending up in the water in the first place? We're missing the opportunity to provide the correct intervention. And that is the nature of what it is to be an upstreamist. Going upstream isn't a destination, it's a direction. We can always go more upstream, or as the military terms it, left of bang. We can intervene minutes, hours, days, weeks, even years before, and provide those interventions so that nobody actually ends up in a downstream rescue. Going upstream is a declaration of personal agency. It's basically saying, I don't have to be at the mercy of the way things are. And as a profession, I would argue that we heavily water the seeds of heroism and hubris. But what do we do for those people in our community and in our agency that keep the day from needing to be saved in the first place? And so with that as a background and sort of preamble, I always start with this slide. And the reason that I start with this slide, it comes from an experience. And for those who can't see it, I don't know, maybe technology is not working, so I will read it real briefly. There is no honor in putting out a fire that could have been prevented. And I use this as an initial self-assessment to let you know, or allow you to reflect, on where you lie on the upstream spectrum. And what I can tell you from experience at the National Fire Academy and the managing officer curriculum, inevitably, this is a gut punch statement for some of the students. And I can tell you, it's the 20-year salty captain, truck captain, reads this, crosses their arms, and kind of pushes back a little bit in their chair. It's almost an affront to who we believe ourselves to be. And by the end of their NFA experience through the managing officer program and talking to them about strategic community risk reduction and the opportunity to be an upstreamist, they understand more of why this is a very, very relevant and true statement. Paul Batalden, he's very famous for saying, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And I would contend that the American Fire Service, or the fire service in general, has currently positioned itself within our communities as responders, first responders, in fact, when in reality, we should maybe call ourselves last responders, because the honest truth is all other possibilities for an upstream intervention or a left of bang intervention have failed or not been implemented. So how about this? It sounds so simple. So why is it so hard to do? The reality is, when we spend all of our time responding to problems, we overlook the opportunity of how we could be preventing them. If we look at our headlines, we as a profession, we celebrate loss, we reward loss, and we favor reaction. This isn't anything new. You'll see the lithograph on the left of the slide. That's a 1950s New York fire lithograph that was in print. And then just next to that, you'll see a current cover from a popular publication of our industry. What we're doing is we're celebrating that loss. We're demonstrating that that is what we value, whether we mean it or not. The second thing is that there's ambiguity in prevention. Going upstream, how do we capture that our incremental efforts are making our community safer? We, as a profession, favor our tradition and that social identity, and our iconography proves it. You see Ben Franklin there on the top, and then you see what is a current photo of the iconic American firefighter in all of their regalia and element. And that's the problem. As a profession, we favor that response model and reaction model over prevention because it's easier to see and it's easier to measure, and the results are immediate. However, if we're working on upstream problems, the solutions are fuzzy, but when they work, they really work. When we start looking at our profession, we deal with what we call repeat offenders or system abusers or super utilizers, and we recognize them as being proximate to causing our increase in call volumes. But are we really solving the problem, or are we just delaying? We're continuing to go to fall injuries and fires because they fall into our response spectrum. But why? Why? What are we doing to move beyond a reactionary and response mode and become more upstream? So to get upstream, we need to understand what it is that is standing in our way from getting there. And according to Dan Heath, the author of the book Upstream, he identifies 3 critical components that we need to deconstruct in order to maximize our efforts in our upstream intent for our agency's mission. And he identifies these as problem blindness, tunneling, and a lack of ownership. So let's look at each one of those. In the first case, in the first instance, when we talk about problem blindness, this is the nope, I don't see it. It's the belief that negative outcomes are natural, they're inevitable. We tell we tell ourselves things like, that's just the way things are around here. And ultimately, we treat these problems a lot like the weather. Like it or not, it's just the way it is. The best thing that we can do is just accept it. And if we adopt that ethos, we end up missing potential solutions that actually might be existing right in front of our eyes. So when we don't see a problem, we can't solve it. And that blindness creates a sense of passivity that can exist even in the face of enormous harm. I'm going to use a couple of examples in the preceding slides that talk about two things: the hypnosis of complexity and functional fixedness. You'll see on the right of the slide, Dr. Marcus Elliott. And as we often refer to ourselves in the fire service, and I believe rightfully so, we're occupational athletes. And we've almost relegated ourselves to believe that injuries are just a part of the game, part of our profession. Well, Marcus Elliott, when he was appointed to the staff of the New England Patriots as a physician, he decided to ignore that common wisdom, and he headed upstream to solve the most common injuries in football, the pulled hamstring. What he recognized was that he could dramatically reduce the number and occurrences of injuries by focusing on an individual training program for each one of the football players on the New England Patriots. In that simple example of an upstream effort, in his first year, hamstring injuries went down from 22 to 3. Dr. Elliott didn't accept that injuries were just like the weather. So, as I mentioned, there's the hypnosis of complexity and functional fixedness, which kind of contribute to this idea of problem blindness. The next slide is going to be an exercise, because the next slide asks the question, how do you change the system? And so for those of you who have not seen this before, this is a cognitive performance test that measures the influence of functional fixedness on our ability to solve problems that we should be able to see. This test was created by a Gestalt psychologist by the name of Carl Dunker. And he shows this slide to the participants in his research, and he gives the simple instruction: attach the candle to the wall in such a way that it can be lit and burn without dripping wax on the table. So I'll let everybody just kind of sit with this idea and kind of look at it. And to be clear, there is a book of matches, a box of tacks, and a candle, and that square is the table that it's supposed to be sitting on, with walls on the back side of the image. So if we've come up with our plan, that's great. If we don't have an idea quite yet, or we don't know if we're going to get there, we'll see what this hypnosis of complexity looks like. Less than 10% of the people, when they were shown that initial problem, could not solve this problem. However, when the situation changes and when more information shows up, and what Carl Dunker offered them was that if the tacks were dumped out of the box and set on the table, they saw an opportunity that they didn't perceive in the first case. So this example helps to illustrate that this hypnosis of complexity and functional fixedness is all around us, and that simple things can sometimes be very confusing. There's a nice little video to enjoy here.
Whoa, that's not good.
I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come.
Telephone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, not enough left to do.
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
All right, so I share that video because I believe that that sort of puts on the point. Wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody just would always show up and fix it? But the American Fire Service has positioned itself within our communities that show up, and we're the ones fixing things and making things better, or attempting to. The real problem, in my perspective, is that when our line staff, our organizational membership, view themselves as being on the escalator, and it's only the administrative staff, the chief officers or captains, that are positioned within the organization that have the authority to fix these problems. I would argue that what we need to do is unleash our organization's potential and move beyond the simplicity of that functional fixedness and that hypnosis of complexity. We need people in our organizations to be values-driven, mission-focused, but also being focused on fixing the problem that is presented to them and not throwing their hands up and saying, man, I wish somebody else would come up, show up and fix this for me. So in the second example, we couldn't see the problem. The second piece is a lack of ownership. So no, I can't see the problem. Now it's no, it's not my job. And the problem with this thinking, it may be apparent, but when nobody takes responsibility for a problem, there's no one there to solve it. What we end up with is this sense or this notion or this complacency that ends up occurring within our organizations. And then we have to really ask ourselves, what problems do we see around us that we can fix, but we don't? If we're going to become an upstreamist and we want to start moving more upstream, it requires that we take ownership of issues on a personal level. And the mantra needs to be, I choose to fix this problem, not because it's demanded of me, but because I can, and it's worth fixing. So that asks us to beg a question from ourselves. Are we creating a culture that encourages this sense of personal agency? We need to move people beyond simple compliance and move them into genuine commitments. And you think about this on, what do our crews look like? What do the apparatus that they're responding look like? Do they take personal agency and responsibility of their apparatus? Are there uniforms? Do they take care of those? Do they look sharp? This is a projection of ownership. And when individuals take personal ownership of that portion of the agency that they're responsible for, we're moving beyond compliance into that realm of commitment. And sometimes the problem with this lack of ownership is that the problem is fractured or split into tiny or multiple pieces, when in fact what really needs to happen is for one person or a small group to come together and take entirety and ownership of that problem. Are we saving problems? And this is one of these things with lack of ownership when we talk about, most of us, I'm sure, have been on the line or in a suppression role. And how many times are we saving problems for the next shift to solve? And that's the problem with the lack of ownership. In the third example, so we didn't see the problem. We don't understand the problem. And now it's tunneling, where Dan Heath refers this to as basically nope, It's not my problem. And the problem with that thinking is that when we have all of these problems that we're trying to solve all at once, we focus on trying to solve the ones that are most tangible. Most often, these are a short-term and reactive problem or approach. And I love to refer to it because I'm not immune from this. Every once in a while, I say I feel like I'm in the office of whack-a-mole. You know, all I'm doing is I'm addressing that issue that instantaneously pops up in front of me. But as Stephen Covey puts it, focusing on the urgent at the expense of the important. And the problem in that thinking is eventually all problems become urgent. And by that time, it's almost impossible or too late to solve the most important problems. Tunneling, as we see that picture of Andy Dufresne from Shawshank, is where it's a condition that you find people are juggling a lot of problems, and they give up trying to solve of them, and they adopt a tunnel vision. At a certain point, there becomes no long-term planning. There's no strategic prioritization of the issues. And when we're in that sort of negative or scarcity mindset, we become less insightful, less forward-thinking, and operate with less control. Our problem blindness in this tunneling can be overcome by uniting the right people. You'll see this image on the right, which is supposed to be a representation of a Lancaster bomber from World War II on the Allied side of England. And you'll notice that bomber has a whole bunch of little red dots on it, which are representative of bullet holes. And during the Allied bombing campaign of Germany, there were tremendous losses on the Allied side from bombers going to bomb mainland Germany or Europe and then returning. And the engineers and the head shed or the think tank at the time got the smartest people in the room, and they sat there and they said, hey, how are we going to increase the survivability? How are we going to fix these problems? How are we going to get out of the tunnel and deal with this issue of massive losses? And most of the people that were in that room said, you know, we need to start placing more significant armor in every place where we see those red dots. Abraham Wald disagreed. And Abraham Wald said, we need to see what we can't see. We need to see the planes that aren't making it home. And his contention was, if those planes are coming home with that battle damage where we see it, there's no problem there. We need to put more armor in every area that doesn't have a bullet hole in it, because those are our areas of vulnerability. And so I use that example as a fascinating case study in how we can overcome our problem blindness. And ultimately, they followed Abraham Wald's suggestion, and they reduced the number of bombers not returning by 30%. So going beyond Heifetz and Linsky, leadership on the line, talking about adaptive and technical problems, going upstream requires exceptional adaptive aptitudes and mindset. Technical problems are really easy. I can fix every one of those with a credit card, a checkbook, an SOP, SOG. Adaptive challenges are really where the exercise in becoming an upstreamist evolve. And again, these Upstreamist 7 questions are posited by Dan Heath in his book Upstream. And his questions will go through each one of them. How will you unite the right people? How will you change the system? Where can you find a point of leverage? How will you get an early warning of problems? How will you avoid doing harm? And I love the last one, who will pay for what does not happen? And we'll discuss each one of those moving forward. So in the this first question, how in the world are we going to unite the right people? Upstream problems almost always require the coordination and action of multiple teams of people. What we want to do is surround the problem and use data for learning. You'll hear this again. We want to use data for learning, not for inspection. We want to pull together a team of teams and make sure that everybody is facing the solution. You'll see the picture of Abraham Lincoln there. And the reason that I put his image up there is that Abraham Lincoln, in his book, and it's a wonderful book, Team of Rivals, it's talked, and it's almost counterintuitive, but Lincoln chose to surround himself with the strongest people that he could possibly find, despite all of them or all three of the people that he surrounded himself in his cabinet. They opposed him for his nomination of president of the United States. He would ask his political rivals and bring them to the table because he wanted all the views that were different than his were represented on all the topics, because he recognized that by having a different view of an issue was going to be good for him and good for the nation. The middle image, we see a depiction in the Lakota Sioux Native American tribe. There was this role that was played as a sacred clown of the tribe, and the term that they used to describe that sacred clown was Heyoka. The Heyoka were contrarians. They violated the norms of the tribe and the taboos. They turned things upside down and backward. They forced people to look outside traditional solutions to find answers from within. They were the only ones in the tribe that could ask why about very sensitive topics. And then finally, you'll see, in my opinion, it was the greatest basketball team ever assembled, the mid-90s Chicago Bulls. And, Chicago Bulls were coached during this period of time by Phil Jackson. And he used a much more sophisticated form of uniting the right people to craft 3 straight championship teams there in Chicago. He had to balance the talents of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen with a very unpredictable and volatile star, the star defensive player, Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman was extremely loathed and feared by the Chicago sports writers and the fans. They thought that his crazy antics, he'd show up with his hair dyed chartreuse, wearing a dress, would ultimately destroy the team's unity. But Jackson recognized the value of the team dynamics, and he allowed Dennis Rodman's eccentricities to actually assist the team. Phil Jackson bestowed the title actually of Heyoka, rather than giving him another opportunity to rebel against authority. That title was given to Rodman as something for him to embrace and recognize his role in the entire ecosystem of that basketball team. Later on, Phil Jackson, who coached many obvious choices for greatest basketball player ever, including Jordan, Shaq, and Kobe, he recently said that Rodman was the best player he ever coached. When considering the redundancy and assets in our world, it's always worth asking within our organization, who is my Heyoka? The next question that we have is, how will you change the system? We need to change the system and the mindset that is causing the problems from occurring in the first place. A well-designed system is the best way to impact upstream problems. And I always love the quote, or it goes something to the effect of, a well-defined problem is half solved. Solving upstream problems is all about reducing the probabilities that problems will happen in the first place. And I really feel that in the fire service, we're stuck in a cycle of studying failure. Whether we look at our NIOSH reporting, our line of duty deaths, after action reports, it doesn't matter in my mind what we call it, but they're absolutely focused on the study and documentation of failures. And if we were to transcend that view and look at nature, and in the natural world, nature doesn't predict, pretend, plan, or perfect. Nature honors the story of success, because those successes are how things are done right. Learning from failure in the natural world is a biologic dead end. It's educationally of less value. And I use these 2 images to kind of drive this point home. The image on the left is from the 9/11 Commission report that was issued 18 months after the 9/11 attacks. It was 6,700 pages and included millions of references to classified documents. It was absolutely a study in abject failure. All it did was highlight the failures. However, if we were to look at another and different example just to the right, Miracle on the Hudson. For those that don't know that story, that was where Sully Sullenberger landed an Airbus A320 on the Hudson, and there was no injury, or I'm sorry, nobody died, and everybody got out of this plane safely, albeit in the ocean and not at their destination. That is a manual. That's an instruction manual on how to be successful, not the failure, but the success. It's 288 pages, and it's an instruction manual on how to land an Airbus A320 in adverse situations. So that's the dichotomy in my mind. We've got failure being celebrated, and yet we relegate a massive success story to 288 pages. The key here is to fight for systems change, to shape the water. And we're going to hear a little bit from Bruce Lee in just a moment on shaping the water. But sometimes when we're in our systems, shaping the water, it's very hard to see. And so I really like this little joke or parable or fable or whatever you want to call it. But it goes like this, and it's real simple, real short. There are two fish that are swimming along in the ocean. And the older fish swims by the younger fish and says, "Hey, how's the water?" The younger fish looks at the older fish and says, "What the heck is water?" The analogy, of course, is that the water is the environment that we surround us, that we're surrounded in, which causes that resulting behavior. And ultimately, that's what we're driving for, is how to understand our system, shape the water, and achieve a desired resulting effect. As promised, a brief word from Bruce Lee. Oops, sorry. Going through this here. Maybe.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Simply said, right? You be water, shape the environment, understand where you are and how you can appreciate a desired outcome. In our third point that Dan Heath points out, he argues that we need to find a point of leverage. Where can you find a point of leverage? Archimedes very famously said millennia ago that if you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum upon which to place it, I shall move the world. Finding the fulcrum and the lever is the hardest part, but when we do find that, they're extremely powerful. The idea is to learn from key successes in what is called a recursive process to stay as close to the problem and the successes as possible. And that's why I chose to use this image here of a crosscut of a nautilus shell, because as we've talked about the natural world honoring success, the stories of success, the nautilus shell is a recursive or circular spiraling out process where previous experienced successes are celebrated, amplified, and create a larger and larger rendition of what previously existed. The best way to activate a recursive process is to intentionally focus on how we go about rewarding successes within our organization. It doesn't mean that learning from failure, like we talked about before, is useless, because it's essential. It's critically important to not make the same dumb mistakes twice, but we have been focusing far too much on failure. And as an example of this, The federal government here in the United States, the federal government's Townsend After Action report on Hurricane Katrina focused almost exclusively on failures. And there were a lot of them. And there were a lot of them that we would never want to see repeated again. But by ignoring the successes, we as a country missed an enormous opportunity to learn adaptively. For example, there was nothing that was said about the successful containment of 9 million gallons of oil that was spilled by the Coast Guard after Hurricane Katrina. The oil was it was contained by the Coast Guard, not caused by the Coast Guard after Hurricane Katrina. But when would it be a point of leverage and learning on how we clean up a huge oil spill under difficult circumstances in the Gulf of Mexico? When would that come in handy? Well, okay, yeah, right. During the very next major disaster, a huge oil spill under very difficult circumstances in the Gulf of Mexico with the Deepwater Horizon blowout. Our next question is, how will you get early warnings of the problem? When we look at our organizational structure, and we'll dissect those two images, those counterbalanced images of an octopus and then the decentralization of command, I believe that those speak hand in hand to one another. When we realize that our crews and our line staff are the closest to the issues that have the most potential for upstream opportunities, we should capitalize on that. The most successful biologic organisms have an organization that eschews centralized control in favor of allowing multiple agents, or in this case tentacles, to sense and quickly respond to environmental changes. Are we empowering our crews, our membership, to do just that, to adapt, to change to the changes in the environment that they're sensing or they're feeling? And by environment, we can call our response area, our service area. And when we can predict a problem ahead of time, we have a lot more time to maneuver around it and fix it. One of the keys to being able to get past this is to get early warnings of the problems that we're trying to solve. So what we need to be able to do as an organization is to deploy sensors and look for predictors. And our sensors should be our membership that's on the line, that's out doing the work. Our line staff are absolutely the sensors that have the ability and should be empowered with the ability to identify and be receptive to those environmental or response area changes. When we look at this decentralized command, I really like that. This comes from Stan McChrystal's Team of Teams approach. And I'll briefly explain why I think that this is important. I think anybody that's on this in this discussion right now would probably be able to diagram out their organizational chart, and it probably looks like that top left one. Most of us look like that. Well, U.S. military looked a lot like that when they went into Operation Enduring Freedom and OIF, OEF. The problem that Stan McChrystal recognized was, how in the world is by all standards, a third world army really putting us on our heels, giving us a run for our money? And what he recognized was they had gone away from a hierarchical structure, just like you see in the top left, just like we have in our fire departments, or most of our fire departments, for a massively decentralized organization, where there was an understanding of what the mission, vision, and organizational values were, but they heavily relied on leaders' intent, people being able to take action, and have the support that they needed. And I really like that example of how a decentralized command structure can be beneficial for an organization like the fire service. All right, our next question that we had was how you know you're succeeding. The reality is, it's not enough just to take action. We actually need to know that what we're doing is actually helping. And in doing that, or asking that question, what we need to make sure is that we're not experiencing what are called ghost victories. There are three kinds. We'll go over those real quickly. In the first case, that the solution that we've applied is working, and the cause is something external to your efforts. Give the example or the platitude that rising tide lifts all ships. In an example that would relate directly to the fire service, and for those of us that live in jurisdictions that have winter, significant winter, if I here in Meridian, Idaho, wanted to demonstrate a reduction in the number of ice rescues, I would measure in July, and I could tell you that we've reduced them by 100%. So that's where we're actually not getting the solution was external to our effort. We chose to measure at a different time. In the second instance of a ghost victory, what we're measuring is misaligned with our mission. When we succeed in short-term solutions that pull us away from our mission, that's actually a failure. And I reflect on that and say, if we look at the example of recruitment in the fire service, one of the most brilliant questions that I heard, and maybe it was simple, but it resonated really well with me, was we were asking, why are people leaving the fire service? A student raised their hand and said, I have a different question. Why don't we start asking, why are they saying? Why are they staying? Not saying, why are they staying? And I think that that's important, that we're making sure that how we're measuring things are in alignment with our mission. The third example is that our measurement becomes the mission. This is the most destructive because it's possible to nail our short-term measures while actually undermining the intent of our mission. And the example that I give with this is law enforcement, they can change the definition of a crime, which can reduce the results of a statistical reduction in crime in a specific area. Or in the fire service example, what we can do is we can change dispatch criteria that results in fewer calls related to a target call or target area. So again, those are the three things that we need to be cautious of in our ghost victories as we're determining whether or not we're genuinely, authentically being successful. The next question that we have is, how will you avoid doing harm? The reality is there are unintended consequences of our upstream actions, and those actions will actually make things worse rather than better. And although we're never going to be fully able to mitigate the risks of the solutions that we want to apply, it's worthy of doing perform something that Gary Klein calls a pre-mortem investigation. And the way that works is we pretend that a year has passed and a project that we implemented has been an absolute unmitigated disaster. What we want to do is list all of the reasons that was the case. Doing that, a pre-mortem investigation, is actually an upstream solution. I like the statement that, a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. And that was, the Patton, known for his brilliance on the battlefield. He recognized that he had to make decisions based on limited information and limited time. But he also knew that he needed to avoid paralysis by analysis, to make a decision and execute it to the best of your ability. This gets back to unleashing our organization's potential through a mission-driven culture, managing leaders' intent that is predicated on a clear understanding of task, purpose, and end state. I like the platitude of, do not let perfect be the enemy of good. So we'll do a little exercise, if you guys don't mind, everybody on this. I know we are all surrounded by Apple products, laptops, desktops, cell phones, iPhones, iPads, all that stuff. But please don't look at your Apple product right now. And we're going to move into this exercise. And this goes all the way back to, don't let perfect be the good enemy of good. So Apple Incorporated, who here knows exactly what the Apple logo looks like? For most of us, I got this. I know exactly what it looks like. And that's a question we could ask our crews, when we talk about, You know, what do we want them to do? And they're sitting there saying, hey, I got this. I can figure this out. So they have a good plan. Well, now let's look at what happens when they show up. So now how many of you are absolutely certain of what the Apple logo looks like? Maybe not all of you. I certainly, the first time I did this, I was like, yep, I don't know if the bite's on the right, bite's on the left. Oh, well, maybe the leaf is going to the left, going to the right. You see why I'm using this, right? This is so that we can drive home the point that if we give direction, this is close enough. Any of those is a close enough rendition to what we're looking for. And the reason I say it's close enough, would you believe that Apple owns the trademark on all of those? Do you know why? It's close enough. It's close enough. People see that and would recognize that as an Apple logo. Our next question is, like I said, this is my favorite one. Who's going to pay for what does not happen? Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about. The problem with Upstream Solutions is that ultimately somebody needs to pay for them. And ultimately, on top of that, the solution is paying for something that does not happen. So we have two cases here, two instances of this payment, and there's one that's called the single pocket concept and the wrong pocket concept. The first example here is the person who's benefiting from this Upstream solution actually is the one that pays for it. An example is, a business owner that solves an upstream problem sees the direct benefit of it. It's the single pocket concept. In the second instance is that we have one or multiple organizations that end up bearing the cost and they don't receive the primary benefit. This is called the wrong pocket concept. And it's a real issue for most of us in the fire service. So again, I could ask, who's willing to pay for what does not happen? The idea that Dan Heath presents is that what we need to do is have an alignment of incentives. And he calls it, and I love this, stitching together pockets of value. I believe I have a decent example that I'd like to give. And for my municipality, for my jurisdiction, it was the adoption and the implementation of FARS. And for those that don't know what FARS is, it's the Firefighter Air Replenishment System. What I was able to do with my team and with this community was to build we stitched together pockets of value. We included our elected officials, our building community, and what we wanted to do was market it to where there was a clear understanding that they were going to be building the safest buildings to live, work, and raise a family. We created commodity, we created identity, and we got commitment, not just compliance to this FARS initiative. And so I would ask, aside from staffing, what are the two issues that we run out? What are the two resources that we run out of on a fire scene? Air and water. I mean, obviously staffing, but air and water. For the most part, we've got the water figured out. We've got standpipes, and that's written into fire code. Engines showing up, or quints showing up with water in tanks, but air. And the air was the big thing. And so the pocket of value was stitching together the fire department, the building community, and our constituents that were going to live, work, and play in these occupancies. So real quick, actually, we can watch this real quick. FARS literally has a compounding value for our communities. And I'll do this. This is a little bit of a plug for those who aren't familiar with FARS. It takes about 2 minutes, but it's a fantastic. It's fantastic for the American Fire Service.
Firefighters need two essential things to respond to fires in big buildings and rescue the people inside: air and water. Without water, firefighters can't extinguish the blaze. Without air, firefighters won't survive in the toxic, smoky environment. We solve the problem of water delivery by requiring the installation of water standpipes for fire hoses. These are required in all big buildings, but the delivery of air bottles continued to be done the old-fashioned way, by hand. A group of firefighters, known as an air bottle brigade, would be assigned to carry replacement air bottles up numerous flights of stairs to fire crews on upper floors. It is a slow and difficult process, made even more challenging by the hot, smoky conditions and the 100 pounds of equipment firefighters must wear as they climb. And an air bottle only lasts 15 to 25 minutes, so fire crews need a lot of them. Carrying air bottles upstairs takes trained firefighters away from critical tasks, like fire attack and search and rescue, when seconds matter. More crews fighting the fire saves lives and property. There's a better way. A firefighter air replenishment system, also called FARS. A FARS is a standpipe for air, which allows firefighters to refill their air bottles inside a building at fill stations located all the way to the roof. And they can do it in 2 minutes or less, under full respiration. Air is supplied by the fire department's mobile air unit, from a supply of air stored in the building, or both. The air in FARS is tested regularly, and in a recent study of FARS air samples, the air quality exceeded NFPA standards. What's more, because this is a building-installed system, FARS doesn't impact city budgets. Buildings are getting larger. Cities are getting denser. But fire department budgets are not getting bigger. That's why cities in 19 states are requiring FARS, and the list is growing.
Okay. So that's why FARS, and again, I'm a huge proponent of that, and I believe in the value that it brings to not just the fire service, but also the communities that we're serving. So now that we've gone through this presentation, the question is, you can't, or so what are we supposed to do? You can't solve upstream problems with a downstream mindset. So there are three maxims that I'd like to leave you with in talking about how we can do this and move forward. The first is to be impatient for action, but patient for outcomes. The actions that we take are necessary for real change, but it's going to take a while for that action to actually produce results. It genuinely takes conviction and stubbornness to sustain these upstream efforts. The upstream victories are won an inch at a time, a yard at a time, and then a mile, and then we have found ourselves at our finish line. Systems change. That's the desire, is to change the system. The second maxim is to remember is that macro starts with micro. There's the famous saying, you can't help 1,000 people or 1,000,000 until you understand how you can help one. To understand a problem, you have to see it up close. If you want to help solve the biggest problems that are affecting the fire service, we need to seek out groups who have ambitious goals and couple them with people who have up close experience. The third maxim is that we need to favor scoreboards over pills. Under the pill model, our progress isn't assessed until the end of the test or the trial, and there's no adjustment that we make with any new information. The obsession with testing becomes a hindrance to the scale and our learning, our ability to learn. However, with the scoreboard model, our progress is assessed as we go. We get a group of people together to have agreed to take ownership of a problem, and we need to arm them with the data to assess their progress. The question is, how can we make progress this week? You don't initially demand a perfect solution. We need people to take ownership and be flexible to change. Thinking in the terms of continuous improvement. I mentioned this at the front, and I really like to mention it at this point. We need to use data for learning rather than data for inspection. We need to be able to test and learn and test again. Part of what makes downstream efforts, not upstream, but downstream efforts so popular is the fact that the results are quite tangible. Downstream efforts restore us to a previous state. Classic, fire service. We showed up, we put water on the fire went out, our intervention was a success. So in closing on this, I'd leave you with this. Ask the question, what if? When you ask yourself the question, what if, you begin to allow yourself to imagine something different. And as that vision gets more detailed, your mind begins to play with the idea and generate solutions on how to make it real. Some examples of this. Pandora Radio. They asked, what if we could map the DNA of music? Cracker Jacks asked the question, what if we could combine 3 snacks into one? The barcode, what if dots and dashes could help sort the entire world? And Elon Musk with SpaceX asked the question, what if we could create private space travel? Well, in that case, we're still watching that vision take place. What if questions open our minds to new views on our existing challenges? They're going to allow us to look at an existing problem from a different angle. So the next time we face a challenge within our team, I would encourage you to ask the question, what if? And allow that brainstorming of what if, go to what if, and another what if question, and only then start working on how. Well, thank you very much. That concludes the presentation portion of what I have for this Lunch and Learn. I guess I can stand for any questions that any of those in attendance might have. But I think at this point I will exit the screen sharing function. Oops, maybe.
Chief, we've had a lot of comments on nice presentation again. I appreciate those because I really enjoyed your presentation once again. And I do have one question though, and that's, we see a lot in leadership rather. And you as an NFA instructor, a graduate of EFO, and I've asked a lot of colleagues, how many leadership classes have you had? Most people can't count those, but in listening to the presentation and that accountability and that ownership, do you think we're missing something in maybe bringing in a followership in the early stages of the career?
Wow, that's an excellent. I really like that, Brian. Quite frankly, I think that followership is underappreciated, and I think that one of the mantras that I personally try to use, it's not mine. I've stole it from somewhere, from somebody and somewhere, is teaching people to lead from their position, because I think that by being a good leader from your position, it can allow you that space to be a good follower as well. But I think that good followership is a underappreciated skill that we should absolutely invest in.
Yes, sir. I think that's something that we can maybe implement. And then I have a question from Chief Wilson, and that is, what was the maximum favor scoreboards over?
Let's see here. Favor scoreboards over pills. And by that I mean the pill model is, you basically, if we were to think of it in a clinical sense, you're giving somebody a pill and you don't get to assess what changes are going to take place until the end. It either worked or it didn't work. It's like a medical intervention. It's like you're going to push a drug and we're going to see what happens. And whereas with the scoreboard model, we're able to count the downs, count the plays, count the outs, whatever, and we can assess progress as we go. What we do is we try and get people to say, how can we make progress this week? Not by demanding a perfect solution, but by allowing people to take ownership and be flexible to change. And again, with the scoreboard model, we can implement the idea of using data for learning versus that data for inspection.
Absolutely good. And Chief Wilson has responded and he's crystal clear, and that's great. So thank you again. I don't have anything else in chat. I don't want to cut it short on questions, but I do want to allow our president, Randy Hannafin, to say a few words if he wants to.
I'm in transit, so all I have is the audio, but I want to thank Chris for stopping by. No matter how many times I listened to his presentation, I learned something new, and it's always exciting to hear that. So I greatly appreciate it. Dialed in, and I look forward to continuing the Lunch and Learns. Lastly, I'd like to thank Chief Boutwell, who spends a lot of time putting these together and filling out certificates and all the other things it takes to make it happen. So I look forward to it, and thanks for coming by.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Chris, again, I can't say it enough.
Thank you.
What an impressive presentation. We had a lot of praises in the chat, so I don't know if you had a chance to look, but I think we could almost talk all day on that piece of upstream thinking and being better leaders for the future of the fire service. And so thank you so much for your time and your presentation. And we're always here if you need anything, sir.
It was a privilege to present. So thank you all very much for attending, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. And with that, I don't see any more questions. And so I would wish everyone a good day, and I will get the certificates out as soon as I can. Thank you very much.